Greetings and welcome back, everyone, to Into the Nexus, the podcast all about Heroes of the Storm. I'm Garrett Weinzierl, here as always with Kyle, Fergusson, and it's a very special episode today because returning to guest on this episode, the whole episode, is none other than game designer from the Heroes of the Storm team, AZJackson. Welcome back, sir.
Hello, glad to be back.
You're not in the beautiful studio with the repeating logo backdrop this time.
No, not this time. Working from home.
Although
what's weird is it was a smoother process to get on this working from home than with a nice studio.
I was just about to say, let people see, peek behind the curtain. We called each other and it just worked. Last time, I think we had to try like 4 different mics or something. It was
it took like almost an hour to get everything perfect. So I like this a lot more personally.
Well, we're so stoked that you're coming back on, dude. It was funny because this has been on the books for a little while now, and we were like, all right, we're going to get some questions ahead of time. And then since the last episode, so much has come out and changed in Heroes of the Storm that really you're just going to be like a regular host that's here, and we're going to be figuring this out all together and having a chat. It's going to be a good time.
Oh, I'm excited. It should be fun.
Well, thanks again. And also thanks to those of you supporting us at home over at patreon.com/ITN. That's where you can go and support this show, where you can get access to the Discord and whatnot. We pulled some of our questions today from the Discord, as a matter of fact. And to our most recent patron, Stephen B. Junsao. So I'm going to choose to pronounce that one. Thank you for the support. But like I said, a lot has changed just in the last week, but even more has changed since the last time we had you on, AZ, and we figured before we get into all the newest, latest, greatest, best, we would talk about some of the bigger things that has happened since the last time we talked to you, and probably the best place to start, because he's been pretty meta-defining since this happened, is the Zool rework, because this was all the way back on March 11th.
Yeah, I remember that guy. He's pretty cool.
Does all right.
What's it been like? It's because like the phrase whack-a-mole comes to mind for me on Zool, because it feels like he's been, or maybe more like a better phrase would be kind of like molding clay, because it feels like there's been a lot of pushing and pulling and sculpting going on with Zool along the way.
Yeah, it's where the original like reason for his rework in the beginning was actually more of a fantasy hit more than anything. It was because we really wanted to kind of embrace that necromancer. I'm summoning skeletons more often fantasy, and he had it before, but only in laning, and you don't really see it that much because he would leave the lane after he killed it. So we wanted to bring it to team fights and then have things interacted with it. Was kind of like what I was really passionate about doing with him, because like way back in the day in Diablo 2, necromancer was my favorite class. So I've always had this itch to make him make more stuff, right? But it's hard to make more stuff and make the game still feel fun and not be, crowded with a bunch of stuff. So it was a difficult line to walk, and he definitely came out a little bit stronger than I had hoped. And this has been going on for not just Zool, but even like with Deathwing and other heroes lately. You're seeing it with Cassia now too, but we're trying to like trim off a little bit at a time with heroes, because I'm really wary of just overreacting and just dumpstering them when they're too strong. And also, while Zool has been kind of strong, it's not to the super extreme point where he's dominating all the games that he's in. He's got some map places where he's way better, obviously. You don't really take him on maps like Hanamura or, what was it, the Immortal map. So he doesn't just dominate everywhere all the time. So I was a little more comfortable with bringing him down slowly.
That's. I mean, I agree with that too. And I mean, when we were talking about it here on the show, I mean, a lot of it was in the draft environment dictated by the draft and the bans. So it wasn't like he was completely running amok. But I'm happy with where he is now, because it's a kind of a fan pick for me. It's a hero I really like playing, and I'm finally getting him through in some draft games. But it took a while to get there.
It's funny, as me too. I actually really like playing him, so it's this really weird place, because I like playing him just because of how he plays, and I think he's fun. But then if he's strong, and then everybody knows that I'm playing him, then like, oh, he's abusing the overpowered hero. But it's actually just because I think he's fun, and I'm nerfing him too. Like I continually nerf him as well. But it's like, it's this weird place, because I don't actually care if he's overpowered or not as far as what I like to play. I play Like, if you ever see my profile online, like I have a whole sheet of heroes above 15, but it's weird when you like a hero that is good at the time.
That's
But,
fair. My chat accused you
is.
for a while after you were in one of my games in Storm League randomly playing Raynor, and then I think like a week or two after that you buffed level 1 Raynor talents, and everyone's like, "There it is."
Oh yeah, yeah, exactly. It's
Well,
if anything, sometimes that actually happens more because I'm trying to research what I'm wanting to do and trying to figure out what it actually feels like in the live game before deciding what to commit to. Because we play a lot. Actually, what's weird is if you look at my profile on live, that only accounts for maybe a third of the total games I've played of this game, because I play at least 3-ish games internally every day, and so a lot of the stuff that I'm playing and things doesn't really reflect what I'm doing on live, but it still is important to play on live a lot to see what other people are experiencing. Because believe it or not, our internal playtest meta is actually quite a bit different from what people play on live sometimes. So it's really interesting.
Does Zul kind of reflect a change in philosophy of rebalancing or designing the heroes for y'all? Because it seemed like for a while that things were very much like you pick your level 1 and that's going to decide the whole game. And that investment in Q means you're now going to go full Q build for the whole time. But with Zul, and maybe it's just as level 1's being more open, there's this feeling of like, well, I'll see if it's good for a blue build, or I'll see if I go Scythe or Skeleton. And then we saw the same thing happen now with May, and then the Mal'Ganis light rework you did, being able to go into auto attack later on, and now Tychus recently got an overkill, but only in the late game.
I wouldn't say it's a big change in philosophy. This actually originally happened way back when Alex did reworks to Diablo and Tyrael. If you guys remember way back when. We had an issue where Tyrael's Holy Ground, the ability where he casts his sword and then it creates the pathing blocker, he would get that, I think it was at 16 before, and basically that talent just dominated the tier because it was a new way to play and gave him functionality that was very, very unique. And our answer to that, I remember we had a lot of conversations about it, and we decided to try 2 different things with that rework, and then we kind of flexed into it with Diablo as well, which was we didn't want to take away Holy Ground because we thought it was cool. But the problem is, how do you come up with a talent that is so powerful like that and lets him do something that his base kit just doesn't let him do? Like, how do you make a talent that competes with that? We're dealing with this right now with Garrosh's Into the Fray, for example, as well, where it gives a new functionality, and it's really cool. We're not comfortable with making it baseline because that just changes the hero too much. We want to keep it as a talent, but how do we do it? And 2 different kind of talent idea philosophies came in with that we think worked out. One of which was we're more comfortable with having a hero that has a really, really powerful talent tier. And you're picking between 3 things that are just bonkers crazy that change how they play that are really, really good. And the second thing that we experimented with that was kind of unrelated, but it came with those 2 reworks was, excuse me, we wanted to have, how do I put it? Like you mentioned it before, how our earlier talent tiers and heroes, you would have like the Q build, the W build, the E build. It was very clear your level 1 talent kind of dictated what you wanted the rest of the way. We experimented with those reworks of creating multi-synergy talents at least 2, maybe 3 different points in the tier, so that if you have an auto attack build, you actually have 2 options at level 7, or 2 options at level 7 and 13, so that you can flex how the auto attack build works, and it'll have synergy with a Q or an E build as well. And we think that it's just more interesting because, like you said, you're not just making your choice at level 1 and then just going all the way down of the ability that you wanted to buff. One of the core tenets of gaming, I think, in general, that players like to do in any game is have dynamic choices and have intelligent choices that they feel they're making while reacting to the game state. And we tried to replicate that. The thing is, like, if we had our dream, we would do this with every hero on every talent ever. But it's really freaking hard to do and to do correctly. Otherwise, you'd see it on every hero all the time. But it's hard to create multi-synergy talents that are cool, that are competitive, and that feel good in both of the builds that they're being used in. So I would say it's been a goal of ours for a very long time. It's just hard to make work consistently.
That's a great answer.
That is.
Basically, we want to do it all the time, but it's hard. That's the TLDR. But
and that's interesting you bring up Garrosh in that same breath, because what an example of somebody who just has one build, sort of. And you guys sort of addressed that here with this most recent balance patch, which is really interesting. And we'll get to that more in tank talk.
Yep.
If we're going through time here, after Zool, we got to Tassadar rework and call for help. And Tassadar, in terms of our perspective from like HOTS logs, hugely popular. You took a very low pick rate hero and got him to 60% or more.
Yeah.
Was that the goal, or what defines success on Tassadar's front?
You want Tassadar or in general? Because those are two different things, and it can get noodly. So
okay, well,
you pick one first, but I can. You want just in general successful rework?
Yeah, give us some noodles.
Okay. It depends on every hero, first of all, which is why it's noodly. Before we go into reworks, we oftentimes I make it a thing to do every time, and I like to ask other designers to do it, and we're pretty good about it, is referencing what your goals are for the rework. Why are we changing it, and what are we expecting to get out of it? Sometimes that goal is to make them more popular or more mainstream. Sometimes it's a niche hero, and it's actually leaning into their niche and just making their talents way more interesting and fun. An example, the first one was Chen's rework. My goal was, he was extremely niche and had some counterplay issues, and my goal was to make him more mainstream, more generally powerful, and to fix his counterplay issues. Because before, it was kind of binary how you played against Chen. It was, can he outdrink your damage, and can you CC him out of his drinking, yes or no? If you can't, then he wins. If you can, then you have a very good chance of winning. And adding stagger, adding the two-step process to his keg and breath of fire, and giving him more general power because of the sacrifice of his survivability being tied to his trait, was how we tried to make him more of a general lane hero that actually has counterplay that you can see way more often in games. So like in his example, we were trying to make him more mainstream, even though he was a very niche hero. Tassadar's example is a little more different because we changed his role. We were trying to solve some issues of, he was so draft dependent on things like Tracer, Vala, those heroes that he empowers, that it was very hard to give him personal power when he is so good at giving other heroes power. And that's okay for some heroes, but the thing with Tassadar that we felt justified it was that his fantasy as a High Templar and as the High Templar of Brood War was that it wasn't hitting it very well at all, right? He was known as being just this really larger than life, kind of enigmatic but very powerful character. And if you've ever played with High Templar and Brood War, those Psi Storms freaking hurt. They kill everything. They meta define the game in matches where they're in, right? If you can use them correctly. And he was hitting this spot of being way more in tune of being a support for other people and not being the powerful High Templar fantasy. And so we really were looking to nail a fantasy hit, and we were pretty comfortable and confident that he would rise in popularity. We didn't expect this much, but we knew that like nailing a fantasy really hard for a hero like that generally results in them being more popular. Plus, of course, being a ranged assassin that hits that fantasy really well helps with popularity too, because ranged assassins can fit in more team comps, right? The comps that he fixed in opens up a lot after his rework, whereas before it was more niche and way more pointed, and he was probably stronger in those comps, but way more weak in a generic sense. So it kind of depends on where we want this rework to go of what we're trying to do. Some other reworks, like Mal'Ganis, for example, was very, very light. All that I was really looking to do there was to greatly improve his talents, because I felt like a lot of them were pretty bland as far as what you picked. They had very low impact, and they weren't even that different in their use case. So I was trying to just make it more interesting and fun to play him. So that's really what we were going for him. We weren't expecting him to be more or less popular or really more or less powerful in a large way. It was just, hey, people that like Mal'Ganis, make it more fun.
Interesting. So you brought up Chen. And that is an example of a rework. These last few, Zool, Cassia, Tracer, Tassadar, just not only defined the meta for a little bit, but were hugely popular.
Yeah.
But Chen didn't achieve that, even in his like slightly OP state. Why do you think that is? Is it just Chens are Chens and Chens are going to Chen?
I think it's a little bit of that. I do think it's a little bit of the power level that comes out after a rework. The kind of general thing, and this is why it can be really hard to measure rework success, is that we had a string of reworks very recently that you just mentioned that all were really strong after initial tuning, what's interesting is Cassia and Tassadar were undertuned at first, and then we buffed them pretty significantly, and then they just became mainstream heroes, right? And Chen was the opposite. He was a little strong at first, and then we toned him down, and I think maybe even a little bit too much, but he remains now kind of niche. And so measuring success is a little bit noodly there, because I believe that a large reason why Tassadar and Cassia are as popular as they are is because they're really strong. People will always play what is strong. But what will determine whether or not they are or successful in the long term is when they're toned down to be really inappropriate levels, are they still really popular, right? Because then we've achieved what is the real goal of the rework, which is really good talent parity, good design, something that's fun that players actually enjoy playing. And that noise, yeah, we have to be careful of not being lost in the noise of their meta right now versus they are a better hero. So, like, even though Chen didn't achieve, like you said, the popularity that Tassadar and Cassia did, I still feel like it was successful because I'm confident that he has more counterplay. I think that he has cool tricks now that are really fun and interesting for Chen players. For example, using a really big stagger into a Storm, Earth, and Fire so that you wipe off that damage. Like, he has other tools and ways to play that are interesting for the people that like him. So I'm not measuring it too much that he isn't super popular, I guess is what I'm saying.
Sure.
Because he is a better hero. And that's the real goal of reworks, is to make a better hero, because that will last through the rises and falls of popularity due to tuning.
Because I wouldn't imagine your goal is to have every single hero in the game be equally popular.
No, and that's something that is a common misconception, is that, like, two things. One, every hero should be a 50% win rate, and two, every hero should have equal popularity. Those are things that, even to me, it took me years of being in this job to realize that those aren't really great goals to have, and neither are they achievable, because even heroes that are perfectly balanced, and I see that this happens all the time, where heroes are at 50% or above 50% and they're barely ever played. Like, people don't only play what's winning, although they largely do if it's a mainstream type of way to play. So it's really weird measuring all of those things together. But if we have every hero equally popular, then that probably means we don't have niche heroes or heroes that really appeal to a very different way of playing, right? Because if they're all equally popular, they're probably all kind of generic and kind of the same. Because not everybody likes a hero like Abathur, for example, to play as, or a hero like Samuro, or a hero like Rexar with multi-unit control, or Lost Vikings, right? My goal is never going to be to make Lost Vikings as popular as every other hero. It's just not going to happen, because multi-unit control is a very difficult thing to do.
Well, something that I feel like it came up somewhat recently is this idea of, I don't know, one of the reworks we were talking about was like not losing kind of what makes the hero special. Because, like, Lost Vikings, I think, is a really good example in that I think, talking hypothetically, if your goal were to make Lost Vikings as popular as the most popular heroes out there, I'm not sure it could retain the 3-unit control.
No, absolutely not. We would have to do something with the multi-unit and make it a single control scheme somehow. Maybe have 3 units, but you're only controlling one at a time. The other are following it or something. Like, we had some ideas like that, actually. I remember when we were first talking about it, Matt Cooper, if you guys remember him, he was proposing an idea of, like, Marvel versus Capcom 3, or fighting games where you have, like, one fighter in the front and then the other 2 are in the wings ready to go in, and you could switch them out.
Oh, yeah.
So maybe you would have, like, Balog in the front, and then Olaf and Eric are back here, and then you press a button and it switches them, and then they do different things when they're in behind and in front. But even then, that's still, like, super complicated to keep track of 3 units.
Exactly.
Like, you know what I mean? It doesn't really change it completely, but it does change the multi-soaking issue with them, and it's different. But again, it's a different hero at that point.
Right. And that's the kind of thing, like, it's the kind of thing that I, as a fan of heroes, look at and go, well, I don't personally like playing Vikings. It's a bit of a tall order for me. But I would be bummed if they weren't that anymore. Like, if that was taken, they're so unique that when I see a Vikings player, especially in draft, when someone drafts Vikings, I'm just like, oh, here we go. We've got a savant on our hands.
I feel like when the moment that lock-in happens too, like, it gets more serious. Like, whenever I see someone, like, this happened to me just like a day or two ago. I was playing a ranked game on Garden, and then the other team first picked Vikings, And our team suddenly went from just not really talking to getting real serious about that draft. Because now we really wanted to win to show this guy what's up, and he's a terrible person for picking this. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it gets a lot more interesting, which I think is kind of fun. Or if someone insta-locks Samuro, or, you know, those niche heroes, Probius. They're like, oh man, I'm getting my Genji out of the dustbin here. Here we go. It's time to kill him.
God, I had 2 games in a row yesterday where I had to lane against a Probius, and it hasn't happened in a while. And I was just like, oh, this is so much work. Like, and those, and that. So I don't know. That's what I always think of when I think of talking about how making every hero equally popular probably isn't a goal, because you would lose a lot of that individuality.
Yeah. That's true, but again, this is like a blanket statement. There are some times where we do want a hero to be more popular and more accessible. So, like, it's Noodling, right? Like, it's not always one, but it is one. To give a little bit of an example, like with Diva's rework coming up, we've talked about it a few times, but one of our goals is to make her a little bit more accessible. Because she is unpopular, I think, right now due to issues that can be fixed and to things that we can make more mainstream. So she wasn't intended to be this like super niche hero that she is right now. So that's an example of the other way around, where we actually do kind of want it to be a little bit more accessible, a little bit more generically powerful, and not so niche.
Cool. I mean, really excited. I'm assuming that's about as much as you can say on the subject of Diva's rework.
For now. But...
Okay. All right. Well, you know, moving on from reworks, but not quite leaving the time frame of April that we started talking about. Call for help. That was an anomaly that saw quite a bit of tweaking, and although there were parts of it that weren't really touched at all, that are still in the game as they launched, like the core abilities.
Yep.
So, I guess, like, what was it? I mean, I'm always interested in kind of getting up to that point, but you know, what was it like iterating upon it once it was already out to us, like in the player's hands? I mean, I guess there's so much of this I'm interested in. I'm not sure where to start, but I guess first off is like, I know you all look at everything, but was there anything that really kind of stuck out to you with the call for help anomaly that made you start making changes? Was it like statistics you were looking at internally, or was it Reddit comments? Was it Jay Howe on this podcast going, it's too binary, the right call is to destroy the fort, and that's the only decision to be made?
Balancing gameplay change updates is really tricky. I would say more tricky than Heroes, more tricky than almost anything else. And why don't we even go a little bit back before we even brought it out, right, when we're testing it internally. One of the things I kind of wish we had communicated a little bit better, because I think of people with anomalies misinterpreted them, was that they're always intended to solve a core problem and to stay in forever, and this is our like gameplay improvement, and if it's not perfect, then it's really bad, right? And these things are really hard to see all of the fallout of when we do them, and especially with a tower, the call for help changes, there were a lot of moving parts with that anomaly. And to be honest, before we released it, I didn't have confidence that we were going to keep any of it, to be honest. I thought that we might keep the towers. My anticipation of what the reaction would be like, the tower changes of prioritizing is going to be really divisive, because it's like other games, and we've had this kind of rule that towers have worked this way for a really long time. And I think a lot of people are going to like it, and a lot of people are going to dislike it, because it's so different in how you fundamentally act around these things, and it changes a lot of things, which we saw it did. And then I actually had very little confidence that the core changes would end up staying, because they felt more like fun gameplay stuff that is really neat but would get tiring. And it turned out that when it came out after a while and we asked for everybody's feedback, it was like they really liked the core changes, and the tower changes were pretty divisive, which I kind of anticipated, but I thought it was going to be way less that less people were going to like it actually than they ended up when we asked for the feedback, which is why I wrote in that post that we originally were just going to cut that. And then all of a sudden, all these people came out of the woodwork saying, wait, hold on, this is actually kind of fun. Can we just tweak it instead? And I think really in general, that's kind of what always happens when we come up with these large gameplay updates, is that there's definitely like a sticker shock when it first comes out that is usually pretty negative, and we have to try as developers to not read too much into that until things have settled for a while, right? Because just being human inherently and being a part of a lot of gaming communities, I've seen this where like a big change happens, and before the change comes out, there's this like period of time where it's announced and then it comes out, and the theory crafting just goes out the window of everything that could be changed and go wrong, and how do we get it to be the way it was, and all these things. And then the change comes out, and sometimes it's like it doesn't impact anything, and people are like, oh, this doesn't matter that much, and maybe it's cool. And then sometimes it does change it, and then people just adapt and like, oh wait, this is more fun. And then of course the third option is it's actually just their doom and gloom predictions were true, and we need to get this out of here, right? So with these kinds of larger changes to the game, we try, of course, to make them as polished and as crisp as possible, but our playtesting can only take us so far. You know, when you compare how much we've been playing with these tower changes, for example, we've been playing with it for some, a few months time or whatever, but the total number of games of people that have seen that goes from, our little team to thousands and thousands and thousands of people within a few hours to a day, right? So we get just so much more data and so much more realization and so much more understanding even between when we're playing internally and then when we're on live, especially in a Storm League setting, competitively trying to win with these things, you kind of see, oh, this is how it actually plays out versus our own theory crafting of how things will happen. So, usually when it comes to these big changes, we put them out, we see how it is, we play with it personally, get our own opinions about what is working, what isn't, what needs to be tweaked, what we need to keep in for a little bit longer, and then we try and iterate from there. But, the process of iteration for big gameplay changes is always much more difficult than just a simple hero because these gameplay changes change the entire game. So we have to be a lot more careful of exactly what we're going to do versus, touching a hero, it only influences those games that the hero's in, but you touch towers, it's every single game that everybody plays. So we have a lot more discussions, we have a lot more debates, and we really try and narrow what we like and don't like about it and what we think will make the game better.
The conversation sort of moved on quickly after that because we changed call for help, finished it up, and then went straight into weather. But to revisit the final version, y'all took away the targeting on the cannon towers. Those no longer had the new aggro. Was that an update to the solo lane or readability? What forced that decision there?
Oh gosh, we had so many debates. It's hard to remember exactly what made it happen. I remember David Warner, one of our other designers, excuse me, he really liked that idea of like the front towers being different from the back ones and felt like there was enough of a distinction that those front towers could be treated differently. Because I even put in my original post asking for feedback that we had this idea, but we were concerned about the discrepancy of two different aggro systems. To be honest, I'm still like a little wary about it, but it seems to have worked out so far. But it really did help the solo lane, which was a big plus. Plus, those front towers are so close to the middle of the map on so many maps that it greatly impacted what you were able to do in the early game in what we felt was a negative way, because you just have so much less space to actually play, right? Oh, and by the time you get to the back towers, you have a lot more.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
No, I was just saying I'm really stoked that you brought that up because I think we've talked about it on like two separate episodes. I think one was with Paradox Kyle about like fighting around objectives. I think we specifically brought up like tributes on Cursed Hollow. Mm-hmm. Like it became really difficult to kind of work yourself around. I call it like that horn up at the top because of the way that tower targeting was functioning.
Yeah, and it impacts a lot of heroes too. Heroes like Tracer, Illidan, Genji, those types of heroes that really need, I call it the distance to safety, right? That's why those heroes are really good on like Blackheart's Bay or any bigger map Hanamura, because the distance between when you engage a hero and they get to their town is very, very large. So those heroes have time to chase and pressure and use their mobility tools to do things. Whereas really small maps like 2 makes it a lot harder when the game starts to be able to put pressure on the other team. Not just those heroes, but really almost any hero. And when those front towers were targeting based on aggro from enemy heroes, it was really, really small, we felt, to the point that it was less fun. So that's why we decided to experiment with it. And again, that was kind of a big gamble change too. I wasn't super confident it was going to work, but I think it has.
the one that sort of lingered behind was the idea of the monsters, punishers, bosses being targeted over heroes.
Mm-hmm.
Are y'all done with Call to Help? Would we see it updated further in the future?
I don't think we're done with it. I would say we're done with it like right now, but if we find pressing things that can be made better, we're not like totally closed, like we're never touching towers again because Call for Help's over. Like, if anything, like if you guys read our last announcement with the weather anomaly, like we want to be open to just changing little things like that when we feel like they need it without a big event being tied to it. So I'm not saying no, but at the same time, like in my mind, at least, I really was resistant to the idea of that specific change because I didn't want more aggro system rules for a player to learn. I think 2 is already pushing it. I thought 1 was what we really should have. But having 3 different ones where, like, you know, you hit an enemy hero and then sometimes the tower hits you, sometimes it doesn't, especially when it comes to things that are less readable, like Braxis. Like, you know, a tiny little Zergling takes the tower from you. Like, it just doesn't make sense as much to me. Like, maybe if it was only Immortals, like those big, giant, hulky things, I could kind of see it. But we have monsters that aren't big, giant, hulky things. And so I think it just gets more confusing and more noodly than what's best for most people. Right? Like the super high level people are going to do it. They're going to adjust and be fine. But I'm worried about the vast majority of people just not even knowing what towers are hitting at all. Like they have no concept anymore because it's switching so often.
Sure. Well, then the posts come up that, well, Banelings have slightly more movement speed, so they get out in front, but the Zerglings watch out. So,
and then at high level, you get really noodly stuff like that too. Of this is the proper way to play, even though it's really unintuitive. And
it's interesting you bring up the weather, so let's move on to that a little bit.
Sure.
Because Call for Help core abilities, those seem like a for fun, maybe not the most impactful thing. Sometimes you're stuck on the tornado wall of Sky Temple, and sometimes you're not.
I was so happy when I first saw Kyle put that in. By the way, I cackled like a madman the first game we had it. I wasn't sure at all we'd be able to put it in, but like somebody got caught on the edge and they were just like bump all the way around. And couldn't move, it died. I was like, can we really do this? We're like, oh, if it was any other map besides Sky Temple, I don't think we would have gotten away with it. But Sky Temple, because the game ends so much without the core directly, I think we were able to do it. But anyway, sorry. That was a really funny.
It is such a range for me. That particular one is either the most ineffective or the most effective core ability. Just depends on where they spawn.
Yep. I agree, but yeah.
But it's such a great example of something that could be frustrating, could be bad, but we're all like, yeah, what a great time.
Yeah.
So what sort of feedback or what led to the decision to cancel the weather? Because that was a fun time. And in your own words, in the words of the post, it was fun, for fun.
It was kind of going back to like our original communication about anomalies that I wish we had been a little bit better about, which was that, you know, they were primarily meant for 2 things, which we put in the post. One was a seasonal change to the game that people can look forward to that is interesting, right? It's just a reason to come back, a reason to play, a reason to be excited that, hey, I got to play this game a little bit different again, right? I have to relearn it a little bit. And then the other reason, oh boy, I'm drawing a blank now. It was give people a reason to come back. Oh man, I'm drawing a hard blank. Anyways, well, my point of this was that the reason wasn't to make systemic gameplay improvements to things that we felt like have been an issue for a long period of time. That was kind of a side goal, but it wasn't the main goal. The main goal was to experiment with new ideas and to have a seasonal update to the game. And I think that because our first 2 anomalies worked out so well that a lot of what they did ended up staying, that people kind of got this idea that all anomalies must be staying. And then weather came out, and this was one of our way more experimental ones. And it was one that we, like internally, we weren't thinking that weather was going to be staying around forever. It was definitely leaning more in that direction of a fun, interesting update. And then people, I think, kind of reacted a little bit more than they otherwise would have, thinking that, oh gosh, this is going to stay around forever. And at first we saw that and we're like, okay, so there was a bit of a negative reaction. And what was interesting was that, like, between the time that we announced it and it came out, people thought it was going to be this giant gameplay change. And we've been playing it internally forever, and it was never intended to be a giant gameplay. It was supposed to be like mostly flavor and a little bit of gameplay and fun. And everybody read the patch notes. It was like, oh my god, this is gonna change everything. And it turned out not to be that, right? But it's just interesting to see how reactions happen versus how the game plays. But what eventually made us decide to take it out a little bit earlier was that we didn't feel like the gameplay gains were worth the amount of negative reaction, and then also the fact that it was causing performance issues for many players was kind of the tipping point to why we decided to take it out early. Because it's one thing, like, we can probably go and tweak gameplay and fix it and, you know, iterate on it the same way we did the other anomalies. But that does take resources, that does take time, that does take effort that could be spent doing other things. And then on top of that, like, it wasn't a guaranteed win. We didn't expect it to be like this giant gameplay innovation that is going to be in forever. And then on top of that, some people aren't able to play our game at all because of this. And that's kind of where you draw the line of, like, unless this is really, really, really good, it's not worth the sacrifices of what we're giving up to keep it in. So I think we outlined a lot of that in the post, but that was basically what kind of was the tipping point. It was really sad because, you know, we put a lot of time and effort into it, and we did a lot of work on it. But at the end of the day, like, I think I kind of impressed this upon you guys last time when I was here in the interview of, like, Heroes at its core, at its identity, is this game that we don't want to be afraid to innovate and push the envelope and do crazy things and try hard things that may not work. And the flip side of that is that if things don't end up working well enough, you have to be able to cut things that aren't working, right? Even though it's, you know, you guys are creatives, you know what it's like to have to kill something that, you know, you thought might be a good idea, but then ended up not panning out. It's hard, but to get the big successes, you have to be able to be willing to do that.
Yeah, and I think the Heroes team have kind of proven that over the years. I mean, going all the way back to the tech alpha. I mean, we brought, I think it was Runes, like, which never even ended up seeing the light of day, because the as I remember it, the pushback was, like, so strong and so immediate. But yeah, the anomalies have been. It's been really interesting, and you've really hit a lot of different nails on a lot of different heads, for me at least, in terms of how I guess, like, how the team is reading into the community's reaction to it, because at least it aligned with a lot of my reactions to the various different anomalies, because the weather anomaly did catch me off guard because of the anomalies that came before it. It seemed more like a tie-in for May than it seemed like something that was cut from the same cloth of the call for help or XP orbs.
Yeah, it actually wasn't intended to be it ended up being a happy timing thing that it worked out. Like, to give you an idea, like, our original idea for this was actually day-night cycles.
Okay.
And I know you guys have talked a little bit about playing with Vision. We actually played very heavily with Vision, and it didn't work out. Again, one of those ideas that we had to go away from. Our original idea was, like, having a night cycle where your vision went from, like, this to, like, this on everything, your heroes, your minions, and it made the game very different. But it made it really weird in cases where, like, you would see someone and you go and fight them, and then there's, like, 3 people right next to them, and then you're dead. Or you'd be fighting somebody and then your auto attacks just start missing because the sight range is less than your auto attack range, and so things would just disappear in and out while you're in the middle of fighting. Like, there was some fundamental things of how our game works that we couldn't go too low in the vision. And then we also found, after making it a little bit bigger, that the map was, like, dark and scary, and it made for these cool ganks sometimes, but it felt like we were taking away something rather than adding something. And it was more anti-fun than fun at the end of the day, is what we found. But whether it spawned from that idea of, well, we can change game states. What if instead of doing day and night, we did other buffs or things and weather things? And what's funny is, like, some of the things that we tried, like, I remember seeing reactions of different streamers and people when we had the patch notes, and they're like, oh my God, this is so big. Oh, wow. And, like, this version is like 1/10 of the things that we tried, that we experimented with, as far as how far we changed the game. Like, you guys get the most mild, mundane. I remember we were having arguments with each other internally of, like, is this just way too boring? This doesn't even do enough for the game. It's the same game. It's not even exciting enough. And we were like, no, we'll just do it because at least it's something and we think it's fun and cool and it adds a little bit. And then the community got, and they're like, oh my God, this is the biggest thing ever. It was just funny, that discrepancy sometimes of like how we think of things as a big deal and then how the community thinks of things as a big deal.
I'm feeling very targeted here.
Maybe a little bit, maybe. I mean,
hey, I was the one who made a whole episode.
Chance, right?
Yeah, I was listing all the heroes that were going to be based on what weather anomaly and armor and shield.
Yeah, that's what I remember. Yeah, it's like so critical thinking. I'm just like, it's just a tiny shield. I mean, yeah, there's snowflakes on your map and it feels like Christmas. I mean, what else do you want?
I mean, I did have one of those with the core abilities, and that's when I walked Deathwing into Hanamura core, and I got rained on. And
and multiple ones will hit you. Yeah,
because you're a big dragon. But
but to give you an idea of like the original lightning, like our lightning storm hitting everybody, our original lightning storm idea, Kyle put it in. I remember we iterate on it a lot. Was like lightning bolts would hit circular. Know when team fights were happening, and there would just be a circle, and everyone would try and run to it and get a bigger buff than what we gave people, almost like a mini bloodlust buff with a lightning shield. And so when you had team fights, there would be these moments that's just like everything changes because you want to be here, and so then you try and force each other out and then jump in. But that's the kind of stuff that we were like thinking might be enough to change gameplay, and then we ended up with just it hits everybody, and it's a shield half as big and half as strong as Rhaegar's, and they get a little bit of movement speed. And that was like the big one that, changed the game the most, right? Out of all of them, except maybe Fog when people took advantage of it. But yeah, it's just interesting seeing like what we try versus what makes it versus what people think is big versus what we do. Because there are a lot of stories, especially from before the game came out, but we try a lot more than what you guys think. I'll just put it that way.
I mean, this is only your second time on, and I don't know. It sounds pretty in line with my expectations after you shared some stories last time of like, oh, they do some wild stuff internally, I'm sure.
Oh yeah.
So, I mean, I like your comments, and I'm not trying to like get you to I don't know, but like, was there a point where you all were looking at the weather anomalies that we had a chance to play with, and was there a consideration to keep one out of the three or two out of the three? And was it like the performance issues that really kind of pushed it over the edge of just, okay, it's time to just pull back from this entire concept?
Well, we had a lot of discussions. I think there's different people on the team had different ideas. For me, my vote when we were like deciding what to do was very much to remove it all, primarily because of the performance issues. I am confident that gameplay wise we could have made it work and made it okay, but I wasn't like super confident that it was going to be way better for the game, and confident enough to keep trying. But if it's affecting performance issues, then it doesn't matter what the gameplay is if some people just can't play, right? And I don't know about you guys, but I've had issues too with games in the past where like my drivers don't line up with the game correctly or just crashes randomly, and like those are so not fun to deal with, right?
Sure.
And so we try to minimize that as much as we can. Like you can't ever fix all of it perfectly, but like if we know that it's related to this and it's not the biggest win in the world, and we don't know if we want to invest a ton of time into it if it's not going to stay forever, then it's better to cut the losses at the time. So there was never really a discussion of like, oh, we just keep Fog because it's cool, mostly for that reason. I don't know if like someday in the future we might revisit it, or maybe like as like snow for a Christmas event, for example, or something. Maybe, I don't know. But that was why we took it out, and I'm pretty confident that was the right decision.
Are those in their own boxes, having no game design powers at all? Is there a world where like Mal'Ganis could make it nighttime to the effect that you had nighttime? And would that be like taggable, drag and droppy, and easier to do?
There are ways that we can. They tend to not work out because they influence the game a lot, but yes, those are things that you can do. To give you a fun anecdote, way back in the day, we were making Chromie, and Kent Eric, one of our hero designers, was the prime designer on her, and one of her ultimate abilities, I think it was still called Sands of Time. I just remember you would hear her say, it would be like slowing the sands of time, and then the entire game would slow down, everyone on the map would move at like half speed except for Chromie. And this was when Chromie's skill shots probably hit about twice as hard as they do now. And she had more range, and if she hit them properly, they hit a lot harder. So everyone else moved half as fast as her, and she got to play her own game for like 10 seconds. So we have these like global state changes, and it didn't ship, obviously. But it was fun for a while.
Can we add a new game mode called like Wacky Match where those rules are allowed? That's insane.
Maybe someday, but it was pretty crazy.
That is
I just remember the VO because it was iconic to "You're about to die," is what it essentially turned into.
The darkest statement. Writing the post about weather, it ended with a rather mysterious and exciting statement about map improvements.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything you can tell us about that idea or where you're thinking of targeting?
Rather than specifically saying map improvements, it was more tying to the idea that there are a lot of designers on the team that are excited about doing other things. And you got to think, I mean, the community is very aware of this. They let us know all the time. But whenever we work on one thing, that means we're not working on something else, right? There's opportunity cost to everything. And what we found as a design team was that we actually like anomalies themselves and what they're doing. But what we're struggling with is that it commits us to a certain cadence of releasing things that can be hard to hit confidently. Like we can hit them every time. We can have something for you, but is it going to be as polished and as perfect? And then does it take away from other things we would like to do? And I gave the example in that post of maps, but that's just like the tip of the iceberg. I've even just a week ago sent an email to the design team like, here's a list of like 10 different things that I think we could be doing that would be fantastic, that aren't anomaly worthy, but would make the game better for our players. And when we're working on anomalies, like, right now for me, it's pretty much a full-time job to keep up with the balance patch changes, right? I have to play internally of all of our new heroes and new reworks and things. I have to play live a decent amount to know what's going on. I need to plan and then commit a ton of different balance changes, at the week cadence. And the other devs help me out quite a bit sometimes, especially with implementation. But like, that knocks me out. Like, I don't have time. I don't have bandwidth to make another anomaly or to do another map, even though I have ideas. And it's the same with other designers. Like, they have stuff that they're doing, but we all would like a little bit more time instead of anomalies specifically at a set release schedule to pursue these other projects, some of which that we want to do our maps, right? I would really like to have, Blackheart's Bay, Warhead Junction, and Haunted Mines, for example, be maps that are more generally accepted by the community that feel a little bit more competitive. So that's just kind of an idea of where we want to go. We don't have anything to announce like, oh, we're going to be doing this right now, because we haven't started that yet. But before those conversations couldn't happen, and kind of the point I was making was now we can start having those conversations.
Well, you mentioned to ask you about this, so I want to bring it up.
Sure.
Map improvements, and people's minds went wells.
Yeah.
Is this the same?
Your mind a little bit, especially, I think. But yeah.
Is this the same as the weather anomaly, where you're just like, you don't even what? That's like, is it too laser focused? Is that too laser focused a thought to have?
For an anomaly, yes. As a gameplay change, I don't think so. So, all right, let's talk about wells. So, we recently had a discussion on the design team that I thought was kind of interesting. But I think and with a lot of things in our game, going back and looking at history of how we got here, I think actually helps frame how we're thinking and where we might want to go. So as far as wells, we've actually had discussion probably once every year or two of like, these annoying people keep sniping wells and people get mad about it and we're mad about it. Should we just not let them do it anymore? And we have a million hammers we could put down saying, stop doing that. We don't like it, right? We can make them invulnerable all the time. We can make them invulnerable till you kill the town. We can move them. There's a lot of options. But kind of an interesting tidbit is how we even got to having wells in the first place, I think. So way back in the olden days of the game, when the towns and forts and keeps that you guys see used to actually be mini towns. And what I mean by like actual towns was they look like little cities almost, like little town, like there were townspeople and stuff. And when you would walk up to a town and fight it, it wasn't just buildings fighting you. You would actually have NPCs and units come out to defend their land. So you would have like, you know, these dwarf riflemen that would come up and they would just blast you away with like volatile multi-shot attacks. There was a town priest in every town that would come out and heal the riflemen and heal nearby minions and heroes. I think we even had a mayor at one point that came out. But the idea was like, they were like the fantasy we were going for, and that I think we still have to this day, less so, but still have, is that like you're pushing into an enemy like civilization or territory, right? You're not just killing one little tower like, you know, what a lot of other MOBAs have. We wanted to feel more epic and dynamic and cool, right? And Wells was one of the things that ended up staying from those ideas, was like you had this structure that didn't fight, but that provided some other kind of utility for its team that you wanted to kill. And the fantasy that we were going for with killing these towns was that first you kill the front wall and fort, and then you move on to the utility things, and then you move on to the main building. So you're like slowly dismantling this enemy base. That's what we're going for. And that's why Wells were in. So as far as what ends up happening with Wells now, as that's translated to, you know, many years later, I think we still have that fantasy a bit, but obviously the well sniping is counter to that idea, right? Is that we're supposed to kill the front things and then get to the utility well in the kind of back. But so with that kind of fantasy and thinking in mind, there is thinking about what we want to do about this in solutions is a little bit more dynamic and I think an interesting conversation, right? Because when it comes to Wells specifically, there's, I think, a fundamental thing about when people play games that you want to, as a designer and as a player, you want to feel like you have alternative choices and that your choices matter and that you have different ways to play a game. That makes players feel smart and encourages creativity. You know, it does all these things that are like why we play. I would say that some different genres leverage this more than others. For example, if you've ever been into card games, like I play a few different card games over the years. I really was into the WoW TCG before Hearthstone came out. And then I play Hearthstone and like Legends of Runeterra now. So I'm like in that space. And they very heavily leverage into this, right? Like a big reason why players are attracted to card games is to try and find off meta or interesting decks or interesting ways to play that feel unique to them, right? And this isn't just a card game, so I'm just using it as an example, but that's well sniping and split pushing and alternative heroes like Abathur, Cho'Gall, Lost Vikings. That is our game's method of kind of tailoring to that self-expression, right? Of, I want to play this game a little bit different, and I don't want to just 5v5 team fight all day, every day. Even though that's still like the main way to win, and we want that to be the thing most people do most of the time, if we just ham-fist say you can only do this all the time, then it takes away a lot of that self-expression. And whenever we would have this conversation about well sniping, it kind of went like this, right? Like one of us would bring up, hey, there's another post about people saying well sniping sucks, or I had it in my last game and it sucks, I really hate it, can we just get rid of it, it's dumb. And then the rest of us would talk about this more flowery stuff of, well, do we want to limit how people play? What about their ability to win the way they want to? Then we look at like, well, you know, it's less than 1% of people are actually doing this. It's not really affecting the game. So is it that bad? And so we get into this back and forth debate, and every time it's kind of come up in the stance of like 55% we want to keep it, 45% we should just get rid of this dumb annoying thing. And so we've just kept it over the years just because like we're a little hesitant to take that away. And, you know, I think that there's still an interesting debate on both sides. Now, as far as if we want solutions to it, because I brought it up again recently to the other designers of like, hey, do we want to at least take a look and like tweak it or do something? Because I've kind of feel like it's at the point that it's a little bit too annoying and frustrating being on the receiving end, and it's a little too easy to execute on the person that's doing it. So we brought up some ideas, and there's different ways we could approach this, right? Like one answer is obviously just move the wells. That one we're all almost immediately spooked by, because mostly like bug related issues, minion pathing related issues. If you move the well, you have to think about where minions path on every single map. And then you also have to think of where they path if you spawn a Nidus worm on every single map, and if you can block them in some crazy way. And then on the third case of why we wouldn't want to is that it kind of gets rid of that feeling that I talked to you guys about in the very beginning of you're slowly breaking down a town over the time. If the well is just in the back, super far back, one, the person that's laning now has to go further back to get to it, and it becomes less useful. And two, now you're not really dismantling the well with the town. It dies after the town, or it dies at the same time. You know, it explodes randomly on the side, and when your main building explodes, which isn't very intuitive either. So we weren't really happy with that answer when we thought about it. But there's a few other ways we could do it. We could, make it invulnerable to the front gate dies or the front towers die, and then it just either becomes exposed or dies. That's one idea we have. Another one we have is that if almost all of the well's health is shields instead of health, so then if it's almost all shields, if that person that's trying to snipe it doesn't actually kill it and you respond in time, they get no value. Versus right now, a lot of it is in health, so they get some value, and then the next time they come, it's almost guaranteed to die.
Yeah, they can whittle it down.
So we can make it harder to do. Personally, right now, that's my favorite answer because that keeps we let players be creative and do different things, but it also makes you as a defender, when this jerk comes to your well and tries to kill it, if you get them off, you like hard win, right? Like they actually wasted their time and didn't get anything. So it's kind of finding that balance, but that's kind of where the conversation is in our minds, to give you guys some insight into, how we're thinking about it and kind of the history of wells. But we haven't really solidified on anything yet, or if we're going to do anything or what. But those are kind of the ways that we're exploring approaching it.
I'm going to get so hung up on that Nidus comment.
Oh yeah. You'd be surprised. We've had bugs in the past where, like, between a well and a fort, you can put a Nidus there, and then the minions just bunch up and don't know what to do, where they go really far around and start bunching up in weird ways. Like, there's a lot of stuff like that we have to think about, because if we don't catch it all, it immediately appears when we make a change, and then we have to figure out a solution very quickly.
Not to diminish, like, the awesome, all the different points you made there about the well, and make it about the one I care the most about, which is Hanamura. But is that why it's so damn open in Hanamura? Is it like a Nidus consideration?
Honestly, I'm not really privy to why the layout is the way it was. I wasn't part of the map team or talked to them about it. My theory would kind of be that those alternative ways to get in a base and do things just to make it different from other maps.
Gotcha.
I'm pretty sure that they were well aware that they could close everything off. They were probably having it open to be different in somehow, or to have some other gameplay considerations. One thing that just comes off the top of my head is that a lot of fights happen around that samurai guy that is near that gap.
Yeah.
And so as a defending team, it gives you a large advantage if you can fall back into your base during that fight, or fall back to your well during that fight. And if it was completely cut off, you wouldn't have a route to get there as easily. And if a fight broke out, you wouldn't have a way to get out. So your defender's advantage is a lot less. But that's just me theory crafting. Like, I actually don't know what their reasoning was.
Gotcha.
But I appreciate you going down that road for us. But let's get back to your meat and potatoes.
Sure.
You're hard working at Tanks and Bruisers, and has actually been a big conversation since we last had you on.
Mm-hmm.
So May was the kitchen sink. It was. I mean, you got blind, closed, a gust of sorts. Basically a huge disengage, a stasis. Was that a reaction to the player base being like, Blaze, Uriel, they're not tanks. We hate this. We're never going to tank with them. And you guys are like, well, fine, here's everything.
As fun as it would be to say yes, no, not really. Most of that is just thematic stuff that fits May. That sounded cool. I do go ham on tuning for tanks nowadays, ever since the Uriel and Blaze a little bit, of like making them very low attack and making them so that they can't really solo lane, to make sure that they don't get accidentally put into that bruiser role. But as far as like May's kit having a lot, how do I put it? It's always a little bit of a pet peeve of mine when people list a hero and they're like, this hero is good because they have a slow and a stun and a heroic that does this. But like, if you list out what every hero can do, you can make any hero sound totally busted, even ones that are meta. Like, I told you, you have a hero that has can stun someone 3 times in a row in its chain CC, and can stun them 6 times in a row in a couple of seconds and can do this from range, you would think that was probably busted. But I'm just talking about Diablo, who can stun you up to 6 times at 16 with Apocalypse and combos into walls, right? Or, a hero with a stun and an attack speed slow and a movement speed slow and a giant displacement ability and can live forever. And a double stun even at 20. I'm talking about Muradin. He's not meta right now too. Like, it's hard when you say like every single thing a hero does, but you have to take into account like how they do it, how easy it is, how reliable it is. What they can't do is also really important. But as far as Faye being a reaction, like we definitely pushed her into the realm of tank pretty hard. I toned down her damage multiple times to make sure that she wasn't, this killing machine. My kind of fantasy for her was that she's just like this honey badger that goes into your team and you can't really deal with and is really annoying, which I think we succeeded with.
Sure.
Mal'Ganis kind of has that vibe too when he's, doing really well and rolling. But yeah, as far as like her solidifying as a tank, we definitely did do specific playtests where I would play her in a solo and make sure that she wasn't dominating that lane to make sure that she doesn't go into that role at least easily. I was also really worried about this with Mal'Ganis as an example too. His kit I think is harder than hers even to balance to make sure you're a tank and not a bruiser, because he has life leech ingrained in everything that he does, and that is a very bruiser thing to have. So I had to tune him very aggressively toward being a tank because I really wanted to be sure. Because another kind of interesting thing about making sure that these heroes come out in the right way is that how they come out on initial release can kind of paint the picture for how the community is going to see them. It's harder to change the community's perception than it is to like get it right and then just make sure that it's fine-tuned. Like getting it right the first time really matters. And that's why I think we've struggled a lot with Blaze, for example, because when we had him in, immediately he went into HGC and was really, really strong as a bruiser. And so it's been hard to get that kind of tag off of him now that a lot of people think, especially high-level players, because he works well in that regard. And so they played him that way before, and they're going to want to now afterwards.
Well, let's follow that thread here, because you did make some pretty substantial changes to Blaze this time around. And we had a conversation back on 323 episode where basically we divided the tanks into 2 categories. There was Johanna, who is unstoppable from the baseline. So she's able to do all these crazy things. Give her some lane clear. She's great at a lot of things. And then you've got the more ETC sort of Mal'Ganis side of things where they just have so many CC options that they end up tanking by sheer note of, here comes Mal'Ganis, swipe, dodge that. Just kidding. He's still sleepy. And he's going to do all these other things after it, right? Like, how does Blaze recapture main tank? And the community thought seems to be he can't do it without new habits baked in.
It's tricky, and I think this goes, I'm gonna kind of like I always do, pull back a little bit from Blaze specifically and go more into the high level of like what makes a tank and what makes a bruiser, right? And what makes this really tricky on our end is that a lot of things that make these roles work overlap pretty heavily. And so a lot of times tanks can be bruisers, or bruisers sometimes can work as tanks depending on what the rest of your team is doing, right? Or what other heroes are on your team, I should say. As far as tanks, like some of the really common things that they do, or that I think are like mandatory, you can't really be a tank without it, is they have to have some type of initiation potential. And reliability here really helps a lot. The more reliable that potential is, the more reliable that hero can be a main tank. They have to be able to peel for allies and survive a lot of damage. And they have to have some kind of CC. I think you can't really have a main tank that doesn't have a good amount of CC. And then with bruisers, they kind of have a little bit similar things, right? They have to have survivability, but their survivability is different from a tank's in that, at least in my mind, they have to be able to go into the solo lane and lane effectively. And that is one of the lines that I try to leverage to make a tank and not a bruiser. Is that a bruiser has to function in the solo lane, basically. So if they can't go up against heroes like Malthael, like Thrall, like Ragnaros, those types of heroes, then they're likely not going to flex into that role. If they can go there, then you've got that chance that they end up being either mainly seen as a bruiser or seen as both. And then as far as how they're similar, if you look at like, think of them in spectrums of what they bring to the team. Like if you have a line and like on this end of the line is low damage and this is high damage, bruisers can kind of exist in this middle to high area, especially with burst damage, and tanks are a little bit lower, but they can have sustained damage from living for a very long time. That's how they get their damage out. But a bruiser can like burst you down, right? Sonya, Spear Slam or Leap just can delete some squishies. Tanks extremely rarely have that. I think the only one that really did and kind of does is Diablo, but that was what we wanted to make him unique as a tank. And then as far as the survivability department, you know, tanks are like all the way on the end of being really, really survivable. Bruisers are kind of in the middle towards the high end, but they're not as much as a tank. And also usually bruisers' survivability is tied to hitting enemy heroes or hitting something or doing something that's interactive. Whereas a tank's survivability can oftentimes just be, I pop a button and you don't get to kill me right now, because they have that on-demand, unconditional survivability. So that's why I think Sonya works, for example, as a bruiser. She has to whirlwind in multiple people to get her tank levels of survivability, particularly later when she gets armor, because armor plus healing is really, really strong. She can be survivable than most tanks, I think, when she's rolling with Wrath of the Berserker, whirlwinding, and pops Ignore Pain or something. But she has conditions, whereas Johanna just presses D or ETC, the threat of his stun into a mosh or his face melt just gets things off of him and lets him live, right? It's very on demand, it's very instant, and it's very reliable. So the thing though is that it makes it pretty noodly. Now, if we go back to like, you're talking about Blaze, I think the biggest thing that Blaze suffers from, even though I still maintain that he does very much work as a main tank, is that he's not as reliable in his initiation potential as some of the other main tanks. His charge has a little bit of a delay, but he does have the ability to throw oil spills and then go into his charge. But I also think even right now he's maybe not as meta as a main tank, because Johanna and ETC, who are really popular, are really good against his method of getting in. Like if he charges Johanna, she can just pop her trait. His oil spills also, she can just ignore that and then just run at him and challenge him. And ETC has really good counter initiation potential. Like Blaze can get a stun, but then ETC stuns right back, and he has the bigger one with Mosh after. So, you know, how they interact with other heroes also can influence if they're meta or not. But Blaze checked off so many solo lane boxes at the time, because I don't think we had as much of an understanding of how, like, out of the solo lane effectiveness you have to be pushed into the main tank role, that he was so good there that it just made more sense for you to have a double beefy frontline team and for him to bring all the tank tools, but then also live in the solo lane for a long time.
So you did something this patch that sort of informs that style, because face melt is just a counter to so many things. So you increase the cooldown.
Yeah,
and
it's
then
really strong.
Yeah, Johanna's cooldown increase on Iron Skin. Like that alone could open up these areas. And what really got me excited was that you also went and gave Muradin a better slow on Thunderclap, which starts to reach that ETC Mal'Ganis sort of, there's just so many options. Would perhaps a better option for Blaze than New Habits be something like giving him that one more May style box to check, even though you don't like me listing boxes, so I won't do it. But like if, let's say Arthas has trouble doing the solo tank thing, I think it's going to be a lot better with Curse Bullet nerfed. I appreciate that.
Yep.
But if Arthas could turn his aura into a root eventually baked in, or Blaze had a root, or these other options that allowed them to have more CC, would that push them into that area, or is public perception keeping them back?
And it's noodly and hard, right? I think it's a little bit of both. A trap that's easy to fall into as a designer is to let public perception define the hero's identity too much. A lot of times I would get this argument for just hear it from people, and even people come up and ask me internally of like, hey, Arthas can never, I would get these statements a lot that I would hear, which is like, Arthas can never be a main tank because he doesn't have a stun. I would just get statements like this. Or X hero cannot be a main tank because they don't have Y attribute that another main tank has. And I've always resisted that line of thinking, because if we follow that rabbit hole all the way to the end, one, it homogenizes all your tanks because now they all have the same things. If I say a tank can't be a tank without a stun, then every tank now has a stun, and that's kind of boring. And the more you do that, the less special every individual hero is, right? And then two, we've seen these tanks work before, and they didn't have those things, which proves to me conceptually that they can work, just that they're not meta right now for some reason. And I don't want to change how they are at a base level because they're not working right now, because what I change can potentially be forever. Their problem could just be a temporary one, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Like right now, a lot of people are saying Muradin can never be a main tank because his Stormbolt is too hard to hit. You need to reduce that Stormbolt cast time because it's not reliable enough. And I just come back with, well, he's been in and out of HGC almost since day one as one of the biggest, longest lasting main tanks that was in games forever with his Stormbolt at this tuning. Are we sure that his Stormbolt timing's the problem? And the answer might be yes, because as other tanks come in, the meta shifts. Maybe he needs this to catch up with where the game state is now. I'm not saying that it's not possible. What I'm saying is I'm resistant to just gut check. He has to be his CC has to be as reliable as ETCs or something. Otherwise, he can't compete anymore, right? And sometimes these metas will shift completely on their own to other heroes as we nerf. If we nerf Johanna ETC, they actually keep a lot of other heroes out, so maybe he comes back, for example. I'm not sure. I don't think that'll be the case in him specifically, but just as an example, like, I'm hesitant to do those kinds of large changes because then I'm doing this arms race with tanks of like everyone's trying to catch up to the other ones, and then we end up with a bunch of overpowered tanks. And that also can be spooky too. Tanks and healers in particular, when they're overpowered, are very scary as a designer. Yeah. Which I can go into later if you guys want to, but they're spooky for me.
I mean, this kind of comes like full circle with the conversation we were having at the top about reworks and the the claim, like the false claim of their goal is to make all heroes equally popular. It's interesting to me that, anecdotally speaking, I don't know every comment that's ever been placed on the forums or the subreddit, but it seems like those types of conversations of X hero can never be Y because insert statement here. I see those the most about tanks than any other role. Like I definitely saw like concerned Chen fans when the Chen rework hit, but I wasn't seeing like feet planted in the ground type statements.
Sure.
I never see it about, what used to be specialist heroes or Lost Vikings or Abathur or any of these other heroes that came up. So I just find it so fascinating that we seem to have a more popular brand of discourse or points being given about tanks than any other role in heroes.
To be fair, I think it's a little bit of just like what the flavor of the season conversation is, so to speak. Like sometimes it's tanks. I remember in the past there was healers. That's all that people wanted to talk about was all the different healers and their meta and their balance, especially when doubles healer was popular. Sometimes it goes into damage if there's a particular damage hero that shuts out other heroes. I don't think it's always gonna be like this for tanks as far as what the discussion is, but it was reaching a point where I was like really agreeing with what people were saying and thought, okay, let's really try and shake up the tank meta a bit, which is why this last patch really focused on them. Because even though on stats, it wasn't showing what people were saying, I play the game a lot too, and I was even experiencing like, Johanna ETC are having very, very high participation, and more importantly than just that, they shut out a lot of other tanks because they're really good at answering and keeping a lot of other tanks out of the meta.
Well said. So, should we keep our eye on future balance patches for even more tank adjustments?
Probably. I mean, we'll do them. I'll be reacting to them going forward, but I cover everything. I try to cover everything every patch. It's just it's a big game.
Well, let's talk about. I mean, there's a huge elevation that happened in this patch, which is Stitch's lane clear. That feels like it can be a really big deal.
Yeah, I'm actually, in the little bit that I've been seeing and watching people's streams and reading feedback, I think it's a bigger deal than people are saying, just as a philosophical thing, which I put in his patch note. I believe it was we put in about like we're gonna have Johanna not have a monopoly on the lane clear tanks. And this is a philosophical shift. Maybe not only for tanks, but we'll see, because I'm scared to do this with healers and other things, for example. But like, we have one hero that their niche is PvE stuff, and it makes it hard to make other things competitive around it, or to make more unique team comps, because you have to have one hero if you want to make a team comp with that unique thing that they do. And generally, we found over the years that lane clear is one of those like gatekeepers, so to speak, of a unique team comp. I would say lane clear and solo lane are kind of gatekeepers to really unique comps where you can flex to do very different things. A couple examples: Zagara can be a solo laner, right? If Zagara is your solo laner, that means that now you can have another bruiser or melee assassin in your 4-man, and you can have comps that are much less likely to be seen, right? That opens up things like Alarak. It opens up Illidan to be taking camps all day long. It opens up, you can have Blaze and another tank in your 4-man and just CC chain people. Zeratools, things like that. Or Phoenix being in the solo lane, for example, I think can work pretty decently well. And so that opens up those same comps. Same thing with Johanna. Like, if you want to play a lot of heroes that don't have good wave clear, like Medivh, or mages with poor wave clear, a little bit like Mephisto-ish, or those types of heroes. Those heroes are harder to draft around if you don't take Johanna, because she needs to supplement to get those heroes that otherwise you just have worse lane. Like, you can try and just eat the lane clear, right, and have it be worse, but if you want to have it to check the boxes that you need for a really, really top tier team, you need other heroes to do that. And right now, only Johanna can do that as far as tanks, so it limits it. And I think with Stitches, what we're experimenting with is like, and Blaze was part of this too. I put that Incinerator talent at level 4 so that he could be in the 4-man double soaking too. But if you have more heroes that can do that, that opens up more DPS options and opens up more healer options, because now that you don't need Rhaegar as much if you have other double soaking tanks or tanks that can PvE. So that's really kind of what I'm going for. But the scary part of this, and why we didn't do this in the past, I'm a little nervous, is if you do this too much, then you can have teams where everybody's doing everything, and then you just don't take unique special heroes anymore, because you just take the ones that are generically good all the time. This is why, like, historically, Rhaegar has always been a difficult one to balance, because he is your jack of all trades generalist. He can take camps, he can soak really well, and he brings the standard healer team fight kit. And so when he's strong, it warps the meta more than when some other healers are strong.
Gotcha.
Funnily enough, even though we talk so much about what each role needs to succeed in that role and be good, the thing I love most about Heroes of the Storm is the lack of homogenization across. That and the mercenary camps, because jungles drive me nuts in other MOBAs. I hate that someone's off doing nothing for me. So I love so much about this game, and it's the reason why I chose this game. But still, those thoughts come up, and you're like, well, I mean, I've been Mal'Ganis in solo lane, and that's... Oh my goodness. It's a long road to 16 for Plague Bats to help me out with that in a solo queue environment where I'm like, all right, I got to go take care of this lane for everybody. Mm-hmm. So interestingly enough, and I have to point this out, you brought up Medivh in the same sentence you brought up the new Stitches lane clear. So you did it all for the Sweet Gorges.
Oh, yeah. The combo's better.
Yeah, exactly. We got Tomb of the Spider Queen, Johanna's band, no problem. Stitches, I'll stack a Medivh on that, thank you. And we're good to go.
Yeah, I mean, things like that I legitimately think those things like that do open up more, because it checks the boxes of the weaknesses that Medivh has, right? Of the lane clear. A mage that doesn't have wave clear, right? So I'm trying to get more compositions that are interesting like that to be possible, which I think does open up hero diversity. But again, it comes with the scariness of, if you get too many of these on each role, then you don't need other roles anymore, type of thing.
Right, or people discover they can do 4 tanks, 1 support, or what have you.
Exactly, yep. And now you don't, and if you can solve the lane clear problem because you have Stitches and Johanna, and then you get, damage tanks like Diablo and Mal'Ganis or something that live a long time and can deal long sustained damage, like, it comes back to like that discussion of, it's cool that people do that, it's not cool if that becomes the way to play. And with tanks and healers specifically, it's very not cool, just as a high level game design thing, because in games where there's PvP, you have to progress towards an end, right? And our way of progressing towards an end is heroes dying. Healers keep heroes from dying, and tanks don't die. And so if you have games where you're up against an enemy team and they just don't die, those on the extreme end are way worse than games where you have 5 assassins on each team and people are dying all the time. Because at least with the 5 assassins on each team, there's not as much counterplay as we want. Burst damage might be high, but you can do things and play around. If 5 healers is viable, or 5 tanks, or 4 tanks and a healer, you get in these situations where like what I do as the opponent actually doesn't matter because I cannot kill them anymore. And that's a very fine line, when you cross that it suddenly becomes very bad. And we were crossing that line with like the double healer meta a long time ago, which is why we were hard on it. Like a lot of people were pretty upset that we nerfed them all, especially in PvE capability. But our thought of controlling them at that time was just nerfing across the board, obviously, and then especially in PvE capability, so that those healers or those comps would at least lose to split pushing or other different types of ways of playing. Because a game where your choices don't matter anymore is not a fun game.
It's so insane to think of that too, because it was such a different time. We had Dragon Blade and Tormented Souls being these heal the heck out of it, let's go nuts, like it'll win. Everyone just pile everything you've got into Malthael or Genji.
Yeah.
And then we also had only 2 options, Val and Greymane. And now we've got Raynor that can do that business. The new Cassia can do that business, and we can split that role among multiple people. So it's weird to see conversations about going back. Oh, well, we can return to that now. We can give Rhaegar self-cleanse. But I've discovered through, like, I wanted to ask you, for player education, should Imperius be made a tank or Stitches be made a bruiser so we don't end up with these weird comps? But what you've told me here is that's embraced. That's the point, is those things should be the way they are so that there's openness for the game to exist.
Yes, to a degree, yeah, I would agree. But like, if you're saying, because I hear this sometimes too, is like, hey, they should just make Imperius a tank because he can tank, or they should just make Stitches offlaner because he can do that. And I think just because one hero can do something is very different from saying at a base level, hey, all players, this is what the hero should do. But those are two very different statements. And that's why I don't ever want to say Imperius, move him to the tank role, because his kit, while it can tank, I don't think it checks enough boxes to be better as a tank than a bruiser at most of the time, right? And that's largely because, like, he has initiation potential, but it's not reliable. He has to hit his Q skill shot's pretty narrow, and if he misses it, he's got nothing for a while. And his W skill shot, you have to hit in the center, which also isn't as reliable. Like, if I think I could pretty easily convert him to a tank if we wanted to do that, it'd be pretty simple. I would just make his W slow at all parts of it and have the center be a mega slow. Maybe reduce Q cooldown a little bit, and then have his E generically heal him all the time instead of requiring him to, like, combo off of heroes and stuff. Like, he would just heal off of everything. Because then he's checking those tank boxes of survivability that's less conditional, more reliable ways of peeling and engaging, and so on. But, you know, he's intended to be the bruiser role, and I think he works there just fine. So just because some people say, oh, Imperius can tank, you should, this is the way you should do it because it's possible, I'm hesitant to just change his role for that reason, right? And I think, especially with him, you have to kind of draft a little more uniquely to make him tank, where, like, he's really good if you have another hero that sets up CC so that his spear is reliable, right? Like, if you put it with Zul roots a guy, then he spears them after. That's a double bruiser comp that's crazy good now because you have the combo initiation potential that's better than many tanks, or some other hero like that reliably sets him up. But just him by himself, like, naked on a team with no other reliable CC, I'm not comfortable saying, yeah, Imperius can main tank just fine in that environment, because if he misses, his team's got nothing now to engage or disengage with.
So it seems like you really kind of leave it up to, like, the personal player's prowess with the hero in that type of
to a degree
scenario.
yeah, but sometimes, like, the meta or the player perception shifts so much that, like, we have to adhere to it. Like, Yrel was originally intended to be a tank, and we just embraced, you know, she's a bruiser, because the concessions we would have to make her a tank we felt too much, to the point that we didn't want to change what the hero was doing at a base level. And this was largely that a big part of her fantasy, and what makes her unique is the charge times on all of her basic abilities, right? But because she has that as that's the Urel's thing, it means that everything she does is a little delayed. And if we want to make our main tank, we felt like we would have to take away that delay a lot to the point that it wouldn't be that unique anymore to her, because she needs that reliability to peel, to slow, to control the battlefield. And so we just say, it's better to just embrace what she does and push her into bruiser rather than try and force her to be a main tank. And I know you're probably guys are thinking, well, what about Blaze? And my answer is I'm just a little bit too stubborn. I think that Blaze can work as a main tank, and I'm sticking to it. But I strongly believe he has the tools to work as a main tank pretty much all the time. I think it may fall apart a little bit at like the highest levels of play, but like for the generic 99% of players, he's got a nasty slow on his W that can completely control choke points. He can set up his E with his W. We reduce the delay on his E. He has on-demand very high survivability with his 40 armor trait. I just feel like he has all the tools, and people can run him in bruiser till the cows come home, and that's okay. And maybe one day we'll change it. I don't know, but at least for now, I still feel like he can do that really well.
I'm really excited to see where it all ends up, because community perception right now, Johanna's dead. You made a very simple change to her cooldown.
Obviously, they're always dead when they
right.
change.
Well, and you can counteract it with a talent pick too. So like, it seems insane of a statement to me, but these things have really impactful meanings in the draft chat and what people are okay with you drafting. So we could very well end up in a Blazy sort of universe.
Yeah. But that was kind of the point, right? Like if I make a change that's intended to change the meta and then the meta doesn't change, then it didn't really do that much, right? So those targeted Johanna ETC changes combined with the other tanks being brought up was intended to hopefully shift around and make other tanks viable. We'll see what happens. I mean, it's hard to say, it's too early, but that was the intent. And I still think Johanna she still uniquely provides really good wave clear. Having the unstoppable trait is still really unique and very powerful and shuts down a lot of different heroes. I don't think that she's really going to go anywhere as far as not being viable at all. She's just so generically powerful, I think.
I love how noodly this entire episode has been.
It is. It always is. Because you're like, man, I'd really like to see if Uther could become a main tank. But now I understand your perspective as to why he's perfectly fine in support. I mean, there's a part of my brain that is sane, so I squashed this down, but I'll share it. You gave Kyber Z more healing, and I'm like, oh no. He's just going to heal himself and go do his own thing now. He'll never heal anybody else. But that's fine, because that's what you signed up for by taking him. That's part of the noodles. It's part of the spaghetti or the ramen and toppings, you know?
Yeah.
Having so many thoughts right now about how less strict specking in WoW used to be versus how strict it became. And anyway, sorry, I'm going to just not go into analogy town.
Oh no, it's scary. Like, it's weird because I kind of feel like, I don't know if you guys played games growing up as a kid or not. Yeah. I played like a ton of Nintendo, Sega Master System, Super, like all the way through, played all genres, everything, right? But like games back then were so much, this isn't meant to be mean, but it's going to sound mean. Like they weren't as well designed as they are now, as far as like perfect answering and intention of how players are going to play, blah, blah, blah. Like games nowadays are so much more streamlined back then, but games back then were so much better in many ways because they were so like broken design wise that you could do crazy stuff as a player. Like if you look at speedruns of old games, for example, like they're just crazy. The things that you can do that you never thought of being able to do. A lot of them are due to bugs, which again is one of those, like, our expectations as players nowadays are so much higher in regards to that. But for those older ones, it's part of the charm, right? And I think that it's like with the advent, especially of the internet, it's a lot harder to make those magical moments of exploration happen when everyone is communicating all the time of what to do and what the most efficient way to do things, and our natural human tendencies to want to do things the best way possible. One of the biggest things as designers that we have to do, actually, weirdly enough, is to prevent players from ruining their own experience. Like, it's actually a very large part of what we have to think about and talk about and do, because just pound for pound, almost most players will ruin their own fun in the name of efficiency. And we have to be very careful how we design things so that the efficient way to play is also the fun way to play.
Yeah.
Right. For example, if well sniping was better, everyone would hate the game and they'd be doing it every game. Like straight up, they would. If this became really popular and was really, really powerful, that's the way to play and everyone would be mad. Right. So like there's this fine line of exploration and fun versus making sure that it's the right way to play and the efficient way is the good way. And it's hard to find that balance because everything's discovered so quickly because of the hive mind that is human civilization with the internet nowadays.
Is there, I just want to get philosophical. Is there like a bit of a disconnect between that though? Because like we talk about it on the show pretty frequently. Like we used to, back in HTC's heyday, really kind of divide our talks into what works for coordinated play versus what works for solo play or a pickup game, if you will. But in kind of in that same regard, is there like a divide between the challenge that comes with the instant sharing of the quote unquote correct way to play versus the portion of the player base that doesn't engage with that? Because it's not every single player that plays the game is on the forums or the subreddit or wherever.
Yeah.
Pick your community.
Sure.
Like, is that like, I don't know. I guess the question is like, how much does the team, think about that? I would assume a decent amount. Cause again, it keeps coming. I keep bringing this back full circle to the whole, like, it's not just about like us, the game isn't designed for just single players that want to check the stun box on a warrior the same way as it isn't designed for me, who I just wish I could play Zagara every game and it'd be the correct decision.
Yeah. And I would say what's weird is that like the loudest and most passionate voices are very often the very top end. Right. And most people, I would argue, and this isn't just for our game, but most games just don't even engage with that or care that much. They just want to have a fun experience. But I do think that the higher end and the people that are communicating and learning these things and dissecting it instantly and saying this talent's good and all the other ones are trash, or this hero's good, all the other ones are trash, or that kind of thinking, it does trickle down because this is a team-based game and it is, even though I might be a mid-level player and not really watch higher level players or interact with Reddit or forums or those conversations, I'm still, the moment that I lock in an unmeta hero, unpopular hero, I'm still probably going to get comments from my teammates or something about that, right? And that's one of those ways where like it's really interesting because most heroes that are off meta or whatever perform really well. Like Gazlo has had a high win rate in many metas for a very, very, very long time. And yet he's never been considered like, oh, if you pick Gazlo, this is fantastic. I'm super happy about this, right? A lot of people see that as like, oh, he's a weird hero. We don't really want him on our team. And it makes it really hard to balance that because if, let's say, Gazlo's at 53 to 54% win rate, which he is very often, that means he's really good. He's as good as your top tier meta heroes right now, a lot of them. And yet, not only is he that good, but I would argue he's actually like a 58, 59 as far as power. He's probably as good as like Zool and those crazy heroes or Cassia before this patch because he is that high despite most often people aren't happy to have him on their team, right? You take a team morale hit for taking those off-meta heroes and yet they're winning even more often. That means that they're like really, really powerful. And yet people still won't accept that, right? And so it's weird as someone in charge of balance because you have to balance perception almost just as much as what's actually happening. And perception often trickles down from the top of, those conversations about like what works at the high level grandmaster or master versus what works everywhere else. I find them hard to make effective for the grand majority of players because at least I do this as a player. When I hear someone say, okay, this is what the top end people are doing, this is what everyone else should be doing, I'm just like, well, I want to do what the best people are doing. That's the best way to play, right? And so like that's the natural instinct that people have is that they want to do the best way, right? People want to be efficient. That's just how humans are. And so it's really hard because like, if I was to give any advice, like, my wife plays a lot and she's in like Silver League and has been for a long time. And there she's just like, oh, what should people take on my team and these things? And I'm just like, well, Like realistically, you can play whatever you want, and as long as you're comfortable and good on it, it doesn't really matter. Like the super high end, high level drafting only matters at the super high end level of play where people are taking advantage of that kind of stuff in a very big way. But like for most people, as long as you're playing well, you can perform well on most any hero.
And even
usually the heroes that are meta are usually winning too.
Yeah, well, and on the high level, those people also know how to play the heroes that they're picking, and getting the value out of.
So it's weird because it's like a different game, right? But it's the same game, but it's a different game.
Yeah.
As far as how people are playing, the same thing of like competitive versus high level hero league. They're in many ways different games when you're on 5v5 comms coordinated on both sides versus not everyone's on comm and uncoordinated. You're 99% of the player experience, right? It's but yet it's still the same. All those foundations are exactly the same, right? So it can be tricky.
Yeah. Well, I want to check with you, make sure we're still good with time, because I feel like we've already taken like your day. We're already clocking in at like 90 minutes.
Oh, I'm okay. It's however long you guys want to go.
All right, rad. Well, let's move to some of the community questions, Kyle. We took a lot of questions, everybody. We looked at all of them, and they've really kind of morphed the conversation we've already had. But we'll fire some of them here at you, kind of point blank. Sure. First off, can we remove quick match and make unranked the default mode? Was a question that was asked.
This is above my level, I would say, but I think it's a conversation that could be had, but it's very difficult because one of the foundations of our game was the quick match style of you get to pick a hero, you get to play that hero. And that's always been something that's been kind of sacred to us. It's not something that I don't think we could ever revisit, but it's a very large conversation, and I would think would be a very jarring change for a lot of people. Personally, I would say I prefer to play unranked and things because, like, if a game doesn't have a healer in it, I don't really like playing it that much because it's just like, again, a different game, right? And so that's just me. But again, like, there's so many people that's very, very important to them. And so we would have to find a way. I don't think it would go like straight to a hard draft, but maybe there's something in between we could do. But we don't have anything to announce right now.
Is the streamline kind of still through unranked to then ranked, or do you guys see people just sort of play whichever they want? There's no onboarding process.
It's a weird one because I wasn't really part of the conversations of making the unranked queue, so I don't know why exactly it was created. But just based on like the conversations I've had with people and just what I've heard and what I believe, I don't necessarily think that it was like you need to go from quick match to unranked to ranked, and this was your progression through our game, and we're trying to funnel everyone into ranked. You know, I think you kind of equate that to like WoW's end game experience, where like you level up, and then you get to play the real end game that is WoW, and then you have all these things you can do when you're max level, right? Our game ranked isn't max level. To be honest, most people don't play ranked. Most people play quick match, and then some play unranked, and then a small percentage of players play ranked. It's not most people. So I don't think that our goal is to funnel people into that, because ranked, while appealing to a certain subset of audience who is very, hardcore, wants to play the game at the highest end possible, likes ladder points. There's a lot of people that like that, but there's a lot of people that just have ladder anxiety. To be honest, I play a ton of ranked, and I get ladder anxiety actually quite a bit before I log into play. And this isn't just our game, but when I would play StarCraft a lot on ladder or other games competitively, like a lot of people just don't want to do that. And so that's really I believe the primary reason why unranked exists is to let people play in a draft environment without ladder anxiety or any of the pressures to hardcore win and make these extremely efficient team comps.
So along those lines, another question that was asked was wanted to know why solo queue was abandoned.
Solo queue was abandoned.
I guess
I'm guessing
Storm
you mean
League.
like Hero League, right?
Yeah, the old
like making
Hero
Storm League.
Yeah.
Again, don't know all the facets of it, but part of it I know is that like at our base game, when we were making Storm League, the discussion kind of went like this of, from day one, we've created Heroes of the Storm to be a team game. I'm pretty sure it was in our original, like how we pushed out the message to the public. It's definitely been in a lot of our design philosophies of, the game doesn't center around just one person all the time. It's centered around the group and everyone working together and the team being one unit, right? That's why we moved to Group XP way, way back in the day. And Storm League was a way to have all of our game modes reflect that philosophy of this game is welcoming to you to play as a team game. You can log in with your friends and you can all play. And it felt weird, and there was a little bit of a disconnect, in my opinion, of this team-based game that's awesome. You watch pros play team-based game, quick match can do it, and yet our ranked mode, where the hardcore people play, can't play the team-based game as a team. And that was the original thinking behind it. Now, of course, that comes with fallout, and I'm not saying that there isn't like repercussions from that, because obviously there's going to be, but in my mind, at least, the advantages of I can play with my friends was more important and outweighs the disadvantages that come from losing a solo queue experience in that way, I think. It's not to say we'll never change things or give back like some way to have solo queue rankings or things matter. That may happen, but that was predominantly the thinking at the time when we changed over to Storm League, was our game should reflect what we're designing it around in all of its modes.
Gotcha.
That's something to think about. That's something. I mean, I've been having a grand time joining up with Heroes Lounge now, doing the NGS stuff. It is a different game, and I still get my team's butt kicked by solo leaguers in 5 stacks. So it's a great learning experience in that way.
Sure. And by the way, I'm saying this, I'm also primarily a solo league queuer too, by the way. So this is like, I'm almost on the other end of the spectrum personally. I pretty much solo queue since day one. That's pretty much all that I've done. And I've been doing that every ranked season since forever. So I understand like the urge and the desire to have a solo queue and solo queue rank and all of that. But like, from a high level, it doesn't really make sense to make a team game and then to funnel people into playing by themselves.
Sure. I've got a question for you.
Sure.
If you were to step outside of, Balance, because you might know things coming down the road too, what would you ban? Like, you change some heroes around. We've been banning Cassia and, of course, tanks. What would you personally say the top 4 bans are for people playing Storm League?
Bans right now in Storm League after the balance patch.
Is this question strictly as a player, not as someone who works on the team? Okay.
No, I can switch hats because I play. I'm probably going to play after this today. Even.
Exactly.
I'm trying to find a list of what I changed to make sure that I'm up to date exactly. One sec. There we go. Personally, I would actually keep some of the bans I was doing before this patch, depending on map. So this is weird because I ban in like Grandmaster Master range. So like if you see enemy names, you kind of know a little bit of what to ban, right? But like, so like step 1 is like look at enemy hero names. If they have a really, really good one trick on a certain hero that you're gonna have trouble with, ban that. Right? If there's one hero that I'm actually scared of that is never or rarely banned is Maiev. I always kick myself in the rear when the other team picks Maiev, and I realize right after that that's someone that plays Maiev. Because I lose to Maiev like every game. I don't know why. Just my team, they pick Maiev. It doesn't matter what I pick. We just fall apart like 4-man chains, and everyone dies, and it's awful. But outside of hero-specific things, I would say on maps where Zool is good, I would probably still consider him a ban. I still think he's strong on those maps, but I wouldn't ban him on, the 2-lane maps or things like that, or open maps. I think the tired and true Garrosh ban is probably back on the table now. I think he's really strong, and both ETC and Johanna were nerfed, and those were really good tanks into him. So if people are resistant to picking ETC Johanna now, Garrosh is going to be, I think, wrecking havoc on some people.
That's a big blaze counter, the Garrosh throw. So there's that in the pipeline going.
Yeah, I just think Garrosh is going to be a pretty hot hero now. What else? As far as ranged assassins, I'm I'm a little wary that we may not have nerfed Cassia enough, so maybe not. It kind of see how it pans out. What else? On big maps, I would ban Rhaegar still. I still think he's like a top tier pick on maps like Garden of Terror and Cursed Hollow because he is a healer that can go and take camps by himself. That's always strong. But honestly, I think the meta's kind of opened up to a lot of map specific bans. Like ban maps that have a lot of jungling and a lot of PvE stuff. I think Rhaegar is worth banning. I think that maybe even things like Malthael may come back. I'm not sure yet, depending on how good he is against the tanks that rise up. But yeah, to be honest, I think that the meta is going to be pretty open. I might still ban Mei, to be honest, too. I'm a little wary that it may not have been enough of her nerf, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, it was very tame, but I'm super happy for that because that's my first pick tank of choice.
Yeah, I think a lot of people will still pick her a lot. So like, if you want to ban popular tanks, I would say Mei and Garrosh are probably your go-tos. Unsure about Rhaegar because the Bloodlust nerf may make people not pick him. I think a lot of people, for some reason, really don't like playing against Ana. So maybe if you don't like going into Ana, that might be one for you. But I do think a lot of it is going to be open to what people personally don't like to play against. A lot of the heroes I think that were nerfed recently were the ones that were like the go-to picks, and I'm not sure what will rise up yet to replace that. Like Stitches got a large buff, but I don't know because people are so used to not picking Stitches because he's been out of the meta for a long time that I don't think, he's ban worthy yet as far as if people will pick him a lot. But I do think he's gonna be pretty good. But yeah. Maybe
awesome.
Cho'Gall. I don't know. He might dominate the meta now.
He's got a really cool
that level 1 talent. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, you gave him some cool tools, too. Moved around 20. So. Yeah.
I hope so. I want to get my Malthael back on, so bring the Cho'Gall picks.
I hope if Tychus becomes a ban-worthy hero, I'll be happy because I was so excited for his changes.
I doubt you were listening back then, but there was a time. I think that towards the end of the tech alpha where Kyle and I both mained Tychus. It was like Tychus. I think was the
hero to pick for a while.
I think Tychus was the. Oh no, this was way after the tech alpha. Sorry, because this was I remember we were still playing Tychus when the 2.0 summit went down.
Mm-hmm.
But that was like the first hero that you and I were both playing. We up until that point, Kyle, you and I like never agreed on or were never playing the same heroes. But
he's got some new toys with that overkill stuff. I'm really excited about. In general, any of these heroes right now that have the ability to wiggle in the late game to take on another role or even just have a different way of dealing their damage.
Yeah, I'm hoping that it works out because I think. For a long time, I was always on my backlog of things to do of like, let's make Tychus's late game talents more fun because like they're from a very, very old design philosophy back in the day. Like you can even see what we changed his talents from of like when we first made talents and heroes, like we thought it was wild and crazy to have a talent that increases the range of your ability. Like that was a big deal back then. Now that's just, part of a talent. But back then that was like the innovation of talents. We still have some like Zeratul level 1 cleave talent that people take right now that's meta is increase the radius of cleave, and that's all it does, right?
Well, it's like Magic the Gathering, right? You get a 2/2 for 2 and everyone's like,
yeah, 2/2 for 2, right?
I'm not gonna use this. You get a 3/3 for 2 and everyone's like, oh my god.
Yeah, exactly. So like Tychus was like our 2/2 for 2s back in the day for a lot of his stuff, and it was just really fun to make them into the crazy things now that we're able to play with.
Would you tap Tychus to increase his range? What would his activate? Jeez.
Well, there's a ton of questions we're not going to be able to get to. There's a ton of questions in the Twitch chat right now, but I want everyone to know we went through so much today on this episode. And of course, AZ, you're working on balance. Like you said, you're not going to have all these crazy answers in all these different departments, but I do want to take a moment to ask you about Broody the Broodlord.
Okay.
Who in the AMA today you brought up was the baby version of Falstad, and how did that transformation work? Because I can't imagine a Broodlord barrel rolling, mighty gusting. Well, I honestly don't remember was it Hinterland Blast came after Mighty Gust, right? There was a time where there was one heroic, and then one of them.
There was a time where there was one heroic, but then for a time, Falset actually had a heroic that did an AoE blast around him. He channeled for a bit and then just exploded. I don't remember where Gust and Hinterland. I know Hinterland was probably the first, and it wasn't called that because that was the original heroic on that hero. And then the other, I think he had the explosion, and then we changed that to Mighty Gust, probably because they're similar of giant burst of AoE damage after a little channel. I think that's probably how it went. But yeah, Broody the Broodlord. Gosh, that was so long ago. So, if you guys don't know, there's only one hero in the game that I actually don't play, and it is Falstad. I won't play him ever. I don't play him ever. The only times I played him have been when I get him in an ARAM, I think, or in some other automatic method throughout the years. And it's because I'm still a little bit salty because I really miss Broody the Broodlord. So way back, and I see Falstad as an imposter of Broody, to be honest. He was like our affectionate team name for him, and I loved him. But way back in the day, like way, way long ago, we were playing around with crazy ideas like we always do. And one of those was that heroes could fly. And some heroes would be unique in that what they could do is they could literally fly over terrain. We also had terrain that like went up and down like hills back then. And Tyrael had it. Broody the Broodlord had it. And keep in mind, Broody the Broodlord, I don't think it was, I'm not 100% sure, but like 90% sure, he was never intended to be a hero as a Broodlord. It was just a placeholder model that they used, and he had, just an auto attack that just like spit out a white thing of damage toward the enemy. And he had the Hinterland Blast. It was just a channel and a giant electric laser beam. Like his kit didn't match a Broodlord. I don't think he had barrel roll though. He had something else, but
you just pulled
I don't remember a Broodlord ever barrel rolling, and I know I would have remembered that if he had it. So he didn't have that. But he had other stuff, and I think also he didn't have mobility because his mobility was flying over terrain. Like, you try and kill him, and he just walks away over this terrain that you can't hit him anymore. And
that sounds so annoying.
It was exactly as annoying as you think it was. A lot of times they would just walk away, or they would just shoot you. Like there would be like a hill here. They just sit on top of it, and anytime you came near their town to fight, they would just poke you from up here and kill it.
Your comment in the AMA mentions the flying heroes and terrain, and
yes.
What I read into terrain is elevation changes, which is something that exists in StarCraft and StarCraft 2 that like plays into things like siege tank range and whatnot.
Yeah. I remember some of the most frustrating moments I ever had in this game. There were two, but one of them was I was playing Illidan's like super, super early old kit. And Illidan's way of engaging way back in the day was he had an E that was like, it ended up being the hunt, but it was way worse than the hunt. It would think of like Butcher's Charge, actually. That's a better way to equate it. Butcher's Ruthless Onslaught where he runs at somebody?
Yeah.
So Illidan's E was like that, except he gained like 10% movement speed when he ran at you. So he would target someone, and then you just like, oh, I'm going to get you, and go a little bit faster. And then when he got there, he could like slice you and silence you, and he did a really high amount of auto attack damage, but that was it. But we kept trying to make Illidan work in our team comps, because back then we were really competitive with this game, because I was on a special QA team called the UX team that would actually play test heroes before I was on the design team. And we always really badly wanted to beat the designers. Like whenever we played with them, it was real. We would even have internal tournaments where we would be, we would get into really high level stuff and study and actually really try to win to beat these designers because we want to be better at the game than them, right? Who doesn't want that? And some of those frustrating moments as Illidan is that he would do this really pathetic little charge, and every time Tassadar would use a force wall, so I just walk back and forth in front of a force wall, or anytime I charge a flying hero ever, they would just bloop, walk over terrain and then shoot me, and I would be stunned trying to charge them still because it would last a certain amount of time before you give up, right? Like Butcher's E, right? Like they go for a really long time and then you give up after a while and they go back to normal if you can't get to them. So every time I would charge, I would just get stuck on terrain of some kind and just never get to an enemy and then just die. And I would look like the biggest idiot every time I would try and go in with Illidan because I would just walk forward and die and not be able to control my character. It was incredibly sad, but also really funny. But one of our favorite moments, we used to have this unit called the Ogrenaut. I don't know if you guys played. It might be before your time, but it was our Grave Golems before Grave Golems came out. So you'd fight this boss, only back then, like the Ogrenaut was pretty epic. It was different than just a Grave Golem fight. Like he had laser beams and like actual like raid like mechanics that you would have to do to beat this guy. And then when you got him, he would go down the lane and do those crazy mechanics, while he's going down the lane, kind of like a Grave Golem. But I remember back then we had last hitting be the way that you would tag these things. So, nowadays we have you beat the camp and then you stand on the point, you get the camp. But back then it was whoever hit the thing last got the camp.
Oh, geez.
And in one of our designer versus dev playtests, I still remember we were having this epic team fight right on top of it. And then Alex Nyman, who worked on the team, he came up with Broody the Broodlord. Like, our fight is here, and Broody's like out here, because the range on Hinterland's Blast before was like really stupid. It was more than it is now. It was really, really far. And he just shot it from across. You see his laser beam hit him, and then we ended up getting the boss for free, and then won the game off of it. And it was like the most epic internal playtest moment that we'd had in a designer tournament. And ever since that moment, he's just always been a Broodlord to me, so I just can't accept Falstad for who he is.
So I need you to spend as much time as it takes figuring out how to get those old replays to work so that we can see this game.
There we go.
Oh, you have no idea. Like, I had spreadsheets of calculating jungle times to do certain camps, and exactly on every hero to the second how hard it was to take the camps, and when we could time pushes with spawning camps to different areas and all kinds of craziness with those playtests. It was a fun time. But yeah, that's Broody the Broodlord. He was really OP and really annoying, but I loved him.
Oh, that's precious.
And his Hinterlands lasted like on a 30-second cooldown too for some reason for like a year.
Oh.
So imagine that. That made him pretty good.
I would be infinitely more interested in playing Falstad if he was just a Broodlord. I hate to admit how much just like fantasy of the model plays a role in me wanting to play a hero, but there's some about Falstad
is a really cool hero. He's good. I'm not hating on him. It's very personal.
Doesn't do it for me for some reason. Like you give me Griffin or Broodlord, I go Broodlord every time. Like every time.
It's like
you're playing Heroes of the Storm. You came for the characters, you stay for the gameplay, and also Tychus is only playable because Infested Tychus. Like we all have these preferences. They're fine.
I don't think I've ever taken Rexar out of his Space Marine skin since I got it. I think he's been in it nonstop.
Like that with their skins too.
Yeah. And then when you guys added the Chihuahua mount, I have 3 Chihuahuas. I got the one with the blue mask because the blue matches his blue Space Marine armor, and that's
Yep.
Yeah. We need to get Keenabrew on here because I really want Misha as a Chihuahua skin, like horribly. But
if anyone can make it happen, it'd be him.
Yeah. So Keenabrew, if you're listening. Dude, AZJackson, you've been so generous with your time. Thank you for coming on. We are about to just tick over to 2 hours. So
yeah, like seriously, thank you for being you, and thank you for doing this much work for the game that we love and all the balance. Like, your efforts are clear. Like, we have seen you ramp up over the past year, 2 years. It's been amazing what you've done for this game. Your passion shows, and thank you for joining us for this roller coaster of a show. Because I know we took you through, some dark times and all, but got back to balance and we took you back down. So appreciate you so much.
Oh, thank you guys so much. It's always a pleasure being on. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
it's fun.
Speaking of things that have changed since last time you were on, you have a Twitter now.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so folks can follow you on Twitter at AZJackson85.
That's what I made it. Oh gosh, I'm gonna have to remember to plug that all the time. But yeah, I'm on Twitter now, AZJackson85. I finally started one. I usually tweet about other stuff outside of Heroes, just more personal things I'm doing, but I do from some time to time too.
Sweet.
Gotta have a good game and diet.
Well, awesome, dude. Thanks again for joining us. We're at the outro now. So is there anywhere else anyone you want to direct folks? Like, obviously the forums, the subreddit, I see you in both.
Yeah, those are the primary ways that we get feedback for now. So by all means, be welcome to post feedback. I would say as general, we do appreciate it when you go a little bit in depth of why you think the way you do or things like that. It helps more. But feel free to post there. We definitely check on those places all the time.
I apologize for my comments about the weather anomaly when they were first announced because I think it was the least constructive outburst I've had in a very, very long time on the topic of Heroes of the Storm.
It's okay. We're used to it. I thought it was quite entertaining.
Nice.
It was a good show. Hey, if anyone wants to hear some of that, like the philosophies of AZJackson here, episode 311 is where we do a lot more like the baseline interview. Today was a lot more of a modern game hangout. So definitely check out our earlier episode with you.
Yeah. Yeah. Other than that, folks, thank you for listening to the show. If you want to support us, head on over to patreon.com/ITN. We have all kinds of perks for you over there. You're going to get access to our Discord, our ad-free version of the podcast. When we have ads, they won't be on that feed. And also sign-ups for our monthly game nights. So go check it out, patreon.com/ITN, and support our show. Also, huge thanks to our producers, Declan H., Cheesy Bob, Chris K., Mike C., and Eric C. You want to catch the whole back catalog, head on over to amove.tv to find every episode of Into the Nexus ever recorded. But when you're not doing ITN, Kyle, where can everybody find you?
You can find everything I do over at kylefergusson.com. That includes Here's the Storm streams and Dungeons and Dragons talk. Also, be sure to check out those videos over at youtube.com/heroeshearth. This week's video is going to be about merc camps. Doing merc camps, when to take them, because they're worth XP. That's the big deal right now, so take them for XP. And enjoy.
Rad. I'm Garrett Art on Twitter. Reminder, I won't be on any of my shows next week. I am taking a week off. I'm going to go do the closest approximation that my wife and I can pull off during COVID, and just taking a break. So Kyle will be holding down the fort. Don't expect me.
With Bahamut. Bahamut's going to be back.
Sweet,
He's gonna
with Bahamut.
join me for the AMA and all the balance crunchy stuffs.
Sweet. So check that out. Everything's at amove.tv. We had a great Angry Chicken this week. If you want to hear all about the new Hearthstone announcements, that is already up on the feeds right now. Go find it wherever the Angry Chicken and podcasts can be found. That's going to wrap it up for this episode. Until next time, good luck and have fun, everyone.
Take care.